What up, y'all? It's your boy, Once or Grove. This is episode 77 of Casting 495 Celebrities, C4CW, Casting 495 Celebrities Worldwide. Thanks for tuning in. If this is the first time or you've tuned in before, we sincerely appreciate it. And God bless you. Hope that you're having a blessed day wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, whether it's daytime, nighttime, somewhere in between. This particular episode is about military intelligence and civilian intelligence. People ask me sometimes, man, how'd you get a job working with the government as a civilian defense contractor? Like, you were in a gang and shit. Like, how the fuck did you get a job doing U.S. intelligence community contracts and shit? Like how have you been paid by the U.S. intelligence community to carry out these types of functions, these types of jobs and assignments and contracts and whatnot? And I explained to them, I'm like, because, man, I'm an entertainer. I mean, I've always been an entertainer, man, since I was a kid. I was always playing different roles, man. Class clown, fucking jock, athlete, shit. When I was a kid, man, honestly, I had a show, believe it or not, on a reel to reel. Like, this is, like, pun intended. This is real information. When I was a kid, man, I used to record on a reel to reel, like the old school, like tape analog. I had a tape recorder, the old ones, like that you had to have, like it was tape that fed through the mechanism. And I used to record, and I've talked about this before on like Reverb Nation when I've done sound bites before, and little anecdotes that I've presented. So I used to have a recording device, and when I was fucking like, like second going into third grade, I used to like turn it on, hit record, and I was just a bored kid, man. And they said I was high IQ and shit, so I was creative and imaginative, and I was always tinkering around with electronics, and I was really fascinated by electronics and machines and different types of mechanical devices and equipment and things like this, technology. So science, technology, engineering, mathematics, before it was STEM, before it was referred to as STEM. And so as a kid, 1980s, I was kind of introverted. Like I could do both. Like I was really an introverted dude, but I also did antics sometimes, and I would be somewhat, I was actually extremely extroverted. But I was doing that as a role. Like I was doing the like class clown shit or the like, athletic thing, for show. Like those things, they came to me naturally. I mean, I worked at them, man. Like I trained, like I used to run track and field, and I was in gymnastics, and I'm saying this humbly, like I was a young athlete and I competed. So, but the thing is that I was really more into like science and technology than I was athletics, and I was more artistic. Like I used to draw and do graphic design illustration when I was young, and I got out of it. I occasionally like I would doodle, but I used to really be into like art, and I would draw like vases and things like this, and they were like, "Oh, he's gonna be an artist," and they were like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I was like, "Well, I either want to be an artist or an architect." Some point I was in drafting. I took drafting classes for engineering and drafting, and learned how to do renderings and draft. And so I would be in my room just tinkering around with different types of tools that I had access to, because my grandfather, who passed when I was young, his estate was there, and I lived in the estate of my late grandfather. I also lived next door. My mother bought a home next door, and before we bought a home next door, we had lived a few blocks away in the housing projects for low income families, because it was just my mother, and my dad was never really around much at all, and he lived out of state, man. So it was just my mother who raised me. But like I've said in the previous interview, I had an uncle across town, not too far away. And I was often there as well. But when I would be at home, like I would be working on like science projects and things that kids do that are like nerdy, right? So, I used to record, dude, believe it or not, like fucking, more than 30 years ago, I was recording like sounds. Like I'd take my nunchucks and I'd like knock my nunchucks together and like record that sound. So I would record like organic sounds and like acoustic sounds. And I'd like walk around the house and go outside and I have my like reel to reel like tape deck recorder, right? And I'm talking not cassette tapes, man. I'm talking the real tape that spins around on a wheel, okay? So I used to record jokes that I would come up with. Like I would pretend like I was a stand-up comedian and I'd be like, yeah, like, and I would be all the different roles in that. I would be the comedian on stage. I'd be the heckler in the audience. And I'd be like, hey, shut up, motherfucker. And I'd be like, man, fuck you. Like I would just be every one of the characters, right? That's how bored I was. So I used to, along with my cousin and a friend of ours and a group of ours, we used to, we had a lot of toys and we had a lot of like computer game systems and different things that we would acquire and come into possession of. So one of the things that we would do, man, is after we'd have something like that for some length of time and excuse me, it went kaput and would no longer function or work properly, we'd fucking smash it, take it apart, take the screws out. We'd open it up, look at all the different components. And we had, we had adult men in our lives, like my uncle and previously my grandfather before he passed. We had a shop. We had wood shop, metal shop. We had both. And we had a lot of uncles who'd been in like the war, like Korean War and like World War II. And dad was in the Vietnam War. And though he wasn't around, there were men in our community that we would observe and see how they would like build things, right? And take things apart, put them back together. And so we saw that since childhood. We would observe those things. And plus the books were always there on the shelves. So we, being curious and children, we read a lot of books. So we would read about how engineering, design, drafting, blueprints, schematics, wiring, how all these things work, right? And so in that, we just having been observant of such, we're like, well, we're kids and we've got to learn how these things, these machines, these tools, how all of these things go together and how they work and how you take things apart and how you put them back together. So we were fascinated by that, and that is the craft that we would ply. And so I was an electronics tinkerer, and would literally like just fucking take things apart and then see if I could get them to power back up, and had access to those types of resources and tools and things like that. So that was the very beginning. I then entered into a computer programming course. Since I was selected to be in this gifted program process whereby I was at the University of Washington for testing at a young age for high IQ. I was periodically in these different programs where I would be tested and reevaluated and tested again and reevaluated, and it was an ongoing process. And in that process, there was a time when there was a computer programming course that was available at the high school. Now, keep in mind, back then, computers were limited in numbers. They weren't ubiquitous throughout the landscape. They weren't all over the place. Like, to see a computer was like, wow, that's a computer. Holy freaking crap. Like, they weren't everywhere in society, and they were fucking expensive. And I had an aunt who she ended up working in government for 35 years. She was engaged. She was in this relationship with this dude from CIA, and she was in the Washington, D.C. area. She had gone to a business school and had certification in computers back in fucking like the 60s, man. And so back then, for a woman to be in a program for, with computers, to be certified in computers back then, in a male dominated workplace environment, mostly back then, it was something that was unusual. So she had a job in government for 35 years. She broke up with dude and she ended up going back to the West Coast. She was in Seattle and she had computers at her home. And she was like one of the very first people I knew that knew how to work DOS, disk operating system, DOS. Like she knew how to like program in DOS and like work within the DOS environment. And she had all these books and she had all this equipment. And I would go to her office in Seattle and visit. And I was a little tan boy that would like come through, and I was always like energetic and like amped up, and I'd be running like through corridors and stuff, and they'd be like, "Ha, he's so funny," right? And then they're like, "Hey, Bobby, do you want to play on the computer? We heard that you're a whiz kid. You can get on that terminal and do whatever you do." And I was like, "Okay." So I'd get on the computer and just start figuring out how to fucking break into shit, right? I'm a fucking kid, dude, and I'm playing Ninja. And so I would tinker around with computer systems back in the 1970s going into the 1980s. I had a friend whose father was a computer programmer, and he was another one of the individuals who I met who first knew how to use DOS professionally. And then there was and as I had said and mentioned in the previous podcast episode rather that precedes this episode. What is this, 77? So I guess it'd be 76. I have a buddy who his father was a technocrat. So I had two friends whose dads had worked for major companies and had computers. And now keep in mind, again, for the record, for historic purposes, computers were very rare back then. They were fucking expensive and very few people in society knew how to operate them, right? So the two sons of the two fathers that I just indicated, they knew from watching their fathers work the computers how to do things with like DOS and other computer programs. And so they would show me things. They're like, "Yo, I know how to do this. Like, this is how you do this. This is the invisible DOS command." And then my aunt, with her computers that I would sometimes have access to. And my mother, believe it or not, as I have shared with the audience, my mother, the sister of my aunt, obviously she's my aunt, right? My mother actually was trained in computer programming herself with the U.S. military. So my mother was required to know professionally, not just like surface, like she had to use it. She had to learn computer programming for the U.S. military for her job in communications. She had to learn Pascal, COBOL, Fortran back in the 1960s, dude. Okay. So my mother, as I have often said in honor of her, because she's a United States military veteran, armed forces veteran, patriot, and she raised me as a single mother along with my uncle in our community, and my uncle's wife, who would be my aunt, my other aunt, which is the baby sister in the family of the matriarchy, because it was a matriarchy. It was my grandfather passed, so that left my grandmother, my mother and her three sisters, so that's four women, and then my grandmother's sisters, who are my great aunts, and they had been in the war themselves. They had been in World War II. My great aunts were some of the very first women in the U.S. Army. They were WACS, Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, or Army Auxiliary Corps, WACS. And so it was a bunch of women who I was raised around. And these women were government, military, and professionals. And I had another aunt who worked at the University of Washington at the University of Washington in Seattle for like 35 fucking years, dude. So where I'm going with this is that my mother, when she worked in cryptologic communications, coded communications, when she worked in coded communications, she had to be knowledgeable in computer programming. So when I was a very young man, I had access to her personal library of books, and I would go through and read every one of the books, like front to back. And then when I was on a computer terminal, wherever that would be, I would try to remember the different various principles of what I had learned in those books, if they would apply, because it wasn't just COBOL, Fortran, and Pascal. There were other programming languages that were emerging at the time, and Objective-C, look it up, Objective-C, Quick Basic, Q Basic, Basic, and of course everything that you now know of in terms of computer languages that exist. Also, there were video game systems that had duality to them, in that they were video game systems that you could also program on. So my cousin, he had some different game systems. There was a Commodore 64, there was Intellivision, and there were different platforms that were out, that some of them you could play video games, PC cartridge games, depending on the platform, and then you could go into programming mode. So it would pop up a prompt, and then boom, you've got the terminal to access the drive, and you could write lines of code, you could program. I also was in computer programming courses in school. So I took, in the normal course of it all, in the course offerings, at one of the high schools that I attended, there was a computer program. Well, in fact, there were computer programming courses at both of the high schools that I attended. What I was leading up to was that before I was ever in high school, I was in a summer program after having been tested for high IQ at the University of Washington in Seattle. I was directed into this program at the high school when I was still in fucking elementary school. So I'm still in elementary school, and during one summer, before I was in junior high school, before I was at the before I was at the high school level, I was in elementary school before I ever took computer programming classes in high school. At the two high schools I attended, going back to junior high school, going back to elementary school. One of the high schools that I would ultimately later attend and take computer programming courses while in high school, when I was in elementary school, I was in a summer program to learn computer programming with these older folks that were there. And if I recall correctly, they were like teenagers and or adults. And I was in that program at the high school when I was in elementary school, at the elementary school age. So I started off at a very young age practicing computer programming, learning computer programming, being in computer programming courses, reading books, taking classes, and learning about the world of computer science, computers, the ins and outs of computers, what makes computers tick. What is the architecture of a computer system? What does it look like? What are the different models? What are the different exploded diagram schematics, right? Exploded view, system components. What does it look like internally? How does binary work and Boolean and all these different types of underpinnings and inner workings and constructs of the world and universe of computers. So I started at a very young age. Yes, dude, I was in a fucking gang officially. I wasn't in a pee-wee gang. I wasn't in a wannabe gang. I was in an adult fucking gang on the streets. Yeah, it was stupid, dude, but, in my situation, there are no excuses, dude, but I did it. And I did it because, dude, gangs had plagued our community, dude, and they were everywhere. And when I'd step outside, fucking the gangs were there. And I had been an athlete in my neighborhood, man, growing up, and I knew a lot of dudes that had played sports, and I saw them joining gangs. And I'm like, man, why are they joining gangs? And then I understood, man, it's just because LA gangs had spread out and they had influence, dude, and shit was getting hella dangerous, man. It was becoming increasingly fucking real on the streets. I mean, don't get me wrong, dude. There were kids that would like throw on a bandana and they're like, hey, I'm going to be in this gang at some point, and like, I'm just going to start learning how to be on the streets and be in a gang. But later on, dude, those kids would fucking be like top drug dealers, dude, selling kilograms with fucking big guns, dude, and like driving in fucking Mercedes Benzes and SUVs, dude, and fucking shooting at niggas and blasting on gang sets and doing drive-bys, dude, and, you know, doing the real shit, dude, on the West Coast, man, connected to bona fide, real life, fucking true to life LA-based gangs that had spread out, because that shit became mega and it was epic. And I'm not saying in a good way. I'm saying that was an era. That was during the time of the Iran Contra scandal. And the Iran Contra affair, as some people have tried to frame it in history as being, well, Oliver North and everything that happened there, with what was considered by some to be an illegal war overseas that was funded because Congress wouldn't approve of such a war. So accordingly, someone said, okay, well then here's what we're going to do, because we have intel community ties and we know how to do all this underground black market illicit shit. What we's going to do, nigga, is we finna use these contacts and connections and tradecraft skills that we wiki scratch possess. Right? Yeah, we're going to use that, man, to fucking make zillions of dollars on the streets from selling rock cocaine, homie. Base rock, nigga. Yeah, and that's what happened. So the floodgates of crack cocaine, the epidemic, the phenomenon, it was afoot and underway. It was just like dope is everywhere. And mysteriously, conveniently, incidentally, the very first crack rock that was ever found on the streets of the United States happened to be like across the street from the White House. What a fucking coincidence. And then it was like shit hit the fan. Police, gang, drug, crack wars. Police, gang, drug, crack wars. Police, gang, drug, crack wars. What I'm saying to you, you had the police, okay? You had, police, drugs, gangs, okay? And for specificity, okay, crack. Police, drug, gang, crack wars, right? Of course there were other drugs, dude. All right? And of course there were cartels involved and not just like street level gangs. It was a fucking mess, dude. And it was an undeclared war on US soil. Aight? So that's real fucking history. They didn't want to call it like a civil war because then it would look weird for the history books, right? But it pretty fucking much was. And so, man, if you grew up where I fucking grew up, man, you kind of, you were faced with this scenario. And I've heard this, I believe it was, Cool G Rap, who used to be Cool G Rap with DJ Polo, one of the most gifted, hip hop MCs in history. He was just on Vlad TV. By the way, I respect Vlad TV, and that was a fucking ultra extraordinarily fresh, deaf fucking interview. And I think it was him. It might not have been him, but if I recall correctly, he said something like, in the borough that he's from, like out here, right? When you grew up in his city, you either fucking man, look, you either basically got down, right? You either ran with it, man, or you got ran over. Okay. You either ran with the crew, with the gang, right? The hood nigga, you either ran with it and just fucking got your dough and just took care of your people, your family, your folks, whatever, man. You ran with it or you got ran over. Okay. So coming up where I came up, man, in my neighborhood, shit was fucking chaos, man. It was chaotic. And I know niggas to this day, man, some of my peers and colleagues and homies and shit, you know, some people downplay shit because they weren't in the streets like I was. Man, they were living across town, dude, in some other space, right? Where it was all peachy keen and whatever that fucking idiom is. And, you think that you're like, dude, you were a school teacher, like in a Korean private school for 10 years. Man, fuck, it's a blur. Yeah, I was. But in terms of like that idiom, is it peachy keen? Is it fucking peachy keen? That's what we used to say. That was a term. That was an expression. It's peachy keen. It's all rosy and all this kind of shit, right? Wherever these people fucking lived, which, hey, man, understandably so. Like, they were in the church and the faith-based organizations and they were all safe in their part of town. Got it. Not where the fuck I was, though. Okay. And yeah, people got choices like, you can hop on a fucking train or a bus or, plane and you could go to some other city and start a new life. Might be gangs there too, though. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like I'm a kid, dude, and I'm a teenager and I see these niggas that are getting fucking dough. Like right out in front of my house, dude, like in my neighborhood, bro. Driving up in Cadillacs and shit, driving up in fucking SUVs, niggas stunting, driving fucking Porsches and shit, bro, with like diamond rings, fucking Poland, man. Look, I would see niggas come out with the brown paper bag, sit down in the yard, because, it'd be like picnic style, like LA fucking up the coast all the way up to, the border of the US and Canada, right? The US Canadian border. Depending on the neighborhood that you might see niggas that it might be in the suburbs and the city's so burned out at the time, right? You'd see niggas out on the lawn and they would have like weight sets and shit. Like there would be like a house here that looks like a palace and shit, and a house next door that looks palatial, as well. And you're like, man, white picket fences and shit. And then, you might even see a white picket fence at the house in between those two houses, and there'd be niggas with a weight set. That was my shit, bro. Okay? I had a white picket fence. I had some weights that niggas could lift on the fucking property. There were niggas in my fucking front lawn playing dominoes and shit, drinking 40s with the police rolling by and coming up to the house like we know that there's guns and drugs on this property. And niggas were like, yeah, and what of it, police? Right? Nigga, I've been in spots that have been raided and shit, man, by Gestapos and fucking police, SWAT teams and shit, man. So come on. So this isn't fictional, okay? And so my point is, yeah, I was in a gang, but here's the deal. Man, I was never a fucking sex offender, and I was never a rapist, and I was never an arsonist, okay? So I never did sick, fucked up shit like that, man. I was never a sicko, deviant fucking, cause I come from a good family, man. And I'm not wired that way, man. And I ain't, man, come on. I come from a matriarchy of women and I respect women. Okay. And if you listen to my raps, dude, sometimes, man, I say some shit like, fucking bitch, but I'm not a misogynist, dude. I'm not misogynistic. So I don't have that shit in my background, man. There's nothing like that in history, any instance of any of that shit on my fucking background. So during the police drug gang crack wars that took place on U.S. soil, right? I was reading in this magazine back in the day because I always knew I was going to work in government. I always knew my parents were government and fucking I just had skills, man. And I'm like, man, I always knew that I was going to fucking be in government at some point, dude. I was a young technical wizard and shit. And I'm like, I got to use these skills for the good of humanity and society, man. I come from before I was in a gang, man, I was thinking about doing good shit for society. So even when I was in a gang, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I always knew in the back of my mind that the shit that we were doing was wrong. But by the same token, I always knew, like at some point, I'm like, man, I'm just going to go back to school, dude, get my certs and shit, my certifications. And I'm going to apply what I know from what I learned on the streets to government contract work. Like I knew the whole time. I always knew the whole time. Right. So here's the deal. So I was reading this magazine when I was in high school. This is the 1990s now. And it was talking about how and I told you that my aunt dated the dude from CIA, and my mother, she was engaged to a Navy SEAL. My father did special operations shit. My grandfather was decorated Purple Heart from World War II. He's in a book. My grandfather is. And so I have these people. One of my uncles was a Mason. In other words, with Freemasonry, the lodge. And, I know people, man, in government. I grew up around, I have a cousin and he works at Area 51 in Nevada. He's an engineer with a fucking master's degree in like engineering and shit. And, man, he used to come around like picnics and stuff and we'd see him for like an hour and then he'd go back to Nevada, dude. He was in the black hole program. So I grew up around people working in government, dude, with security clearances and security credentials and military background and history. My whole family basically was military. Essentially, my aunts, my uncles, my grandfather, my grandmother, my mother, my father. And, so dude, I always knew that I would end up working in government. So everything that I studied when I was a kid and all the books that I read and everything, I always knew that I was going to use everything that I was reading in those public libraries and in those schools and in those programs that I was in. I always knew that I was going to apply that knowledge in terms of government contracting as an adult. So I read this magazine one day, and it was a Time magazine. I believe it was Time, because it wasn't a funny magazine like People magazine, like, oh, entertainment, funny things, right? And there had been, so I read this Time magazine, and it was talking about the rise of super gangs. Keep in mind, 1990s, early fucking 1990s. It was like between 90 and 91-ish, right? Ish. So it was talking about the rise of super gangs. And there was this CIA prediction. Now, this is what this is what has the hair on my arm standing up straight, because I remember this as if it were yesterday, mostly, like almost like to a T. I might be off on the date, Mandela effect, maybe just a false memory a little bit, but I read something in a magazine like Time magazine. I'm pretty sure it was Time. And they were talking, but maybe not, but they were talking about the rise of super gangs. And there was a quote from a CIA analyst who had predicted with fucking ultra cold accuracy that there would be the emergence of what would be called a super gang. And what the super gang concept is if you're not familiar with it, it's not like Naruto and like Super Saiyan fucking powers and all this kind of shit. I'm talking about niggas from the streets, gangs, whatever, black gangs, Asian gangs, Hispanic gangs, Latino gangs, biker gangs, whatever. Niggas growing up, okay, on the streets, being in gangs, going into the military, not for good reasons, but for bad, gaining knowledge of how the military functions, operates, works, etc., and then leaving the military at some point, whether honorably or through discharge, and then using those gained skills to help increase the strength of the gang from where that person had come from, right? The gang, the childhood gang that's now an adult gang, he gets out of the military, she gets out of the military, and it's like, this is what I learned. Yo, man, we got to do shit this way. Like, we were doing it that way, but now we got to do it this way. Plus having, the knowledge of guns and fucking intel and, how shipment routes work with the different fucking organizations and criminal networks and syndications and so forth, right? This CIA analyst had foreseen that data in the fucking even coming up on the 90s, just on the horizon of the 90s. Because I'm saying, man, I read that shit when I was in high school. And I got out of high school in the very fucking early 1990s. And I'm pretty sure, man, I read that when I was either a sophomore or a junior. That wasn't my senior year in fucking school. So it was just shortly after 1989, ish, right? That I read that shit in the magazine. And, cause we had a friend, man, from our neighborhood who had been in California. And he jumped out of a car, man, at 60 miles an hour and shit, and passed, man. And so the homies went to his funeral and shit in California, R.I.P., man, little man. And but the point is he was in an area, man, in California that was so fucking dangerous. He had to go to 2 different schools, right? And at one school, he was a Blood, and at another school, he was a Crip. That is a true story. And you can read, because it was so fucking dangerous, you had to be one at the one school, and you had to be the other at the other school. And that's real shit. And you read gang file history about kids that had to endure that, right? And so the gang shit went down. The gang shit was on and bracking. In other words, it was cracking. Crack was on the streets. Shit was popping, man. It was fucking illmatic, and it was wrong on every fucking level of reality, right? But it happened. And so I knew that it was time to go back to school. And cause I had buddies, man, that were in the streets, and then they were like, man, I got to get out of this shit. So they would go and take classes at the community college because they had the money to do it, right? And so they would go from the streets to the community college. And since we all grew up playing video games and tech, right? And playing with technology and tinkering and all this kind of stuff in shops and things, right? Building things and making fucking bombs and, you know, how do we make a bomb? Like, let's go and explode some pipe bombs and some different bombs at some different locations, like at playing fields at like nighttime or at this nigga's house because he was talking shit, right? When we were kids, like 30 fucking years ago. No, we didn't blow anybody up. No, we didn't fucking kill anybody with the bombs that we made, that we detonated, that were tiny constructs that were, you know, made by us over 30 years ago when we were practicing to learn how to do things, right? So no, we didn't maim anyone. We didn't blow anybody up. There was no property destruction or anything like this, right? Albeit the homie, Mr. Broccoli, he was on TV for a pipe bomb that was found, and I'm just being honest. Brock Landers from 495. He, you know, it was on TV, so it's public data. And you know, they detonated the police special unit. They detonated the pipe bomb, and they were able to determine that you know, it was an actual pipe bomb. But you know, we didn't blow anybody up, man, and we didn't, you know what I mean? So the point in sharing that data, right, is that back in the day, we were faced with that kind of urban scenario, man, on a daily goddamn fucking basis. Right. And then some of the homies were like, man, enough is enough, man. I'm taking my money and I'm going to the community college, man. In fact, Mr. Brock Landers is the one who encouraged me to go back to school because he had already been at the school. And I was like, yo, hey, Bloods, you taking classes? He's like, yeah, man. And I'm like, what? He's like, hey, B, check game, man. Fucking, you should get up in the college with me. So I did. I ended up following his advice, man, and going back to school. I had other homeboys. My homeboy Scoot, he took some classes at the community college. He got his degree, and he got a job at Microsoft, man, making like 120 fucking K back in the 90s-ish. And I had another homeboy, Slow-Mo. Same deal, man. You know, so in other dudes I know from like the West Coast. So I'm like, all right, man, this police drug gang war shit is starting to kind of sort of taper off. And now cats that have been in this street war shit, that are veterans in the streets of America at war with the system, people are having babies, man, getting married, cats is getting older, niggas is locked up, you know? So it's a different world at some point, right? So everything changes over at some point, and then all of a sudden the Bloods and Crips aren't at war with each other, okay? And that was a turning point in history. It was a milestone. You see football games with Bloods and Crips. I became a mentor, man. I was a mentor, believe it or not. And I knew someone who had been he played football at for the Washington for the University of Washington. He's a Huskies football player. And I think he has a ring. I have another homeboy. He played for the Washington State Huskies. And he does have a ring from the Bull. but from a bowl that the Huskies won. And I used to rock Huskies gear, man. I used to rock the purple with the W, man. Why? Because I was in the gifted program, man, when I was a kid, and my buddy graduated from there with his PhD. And so I was, and my aunt worked there for like 35 years. So I was familiar with the campus, right? And man, University of Washington fucking campus is dope. Plus, I have another relative. He's an anesthesiologist, and he played football for the Washington State Huskies. And he's a medical doctor, man, and he's got a big-ass mansion and shit. And so I have family members, man, who have been in and around the campus for decades. I was there as a kid. Some of my friends have graduated from the UW. And so, man, I respect the Washington State Huskies, and back in the day, we used to root for the Huskies, man. My grandmother rooted for the Huskies, my aunts, my uncles, my family. And I used to go to Mariners games, and I used to go to Sonics games, man. The fucking Sonics were dope. In fact, I went to a clinic, they called it a sports clinic, where kids could come out and you can meet like players and stuff, and they would teach you different like fundamentals and drills and stuff. And then you would walk away with souvenirs, like full, like life-size posters of the different, like downtown Freddie Brown and some of these old guys and stuff like that, man. So I grew up in the aerospace corridor of the Pacific Northwest, visited Nintendo headquarters in Redmond, Washington. Fucking my homeboy moved to Redmond, Washington, man, when he got rich in the Microsoft game, and started his own company and shit. And that's the first time I was ever invited to the Microsoft campus by him. Got the tour from him. That was dope. I was with the homie who's got the PhD in mathematics. So it's me, two childhood prodigy friends, right? One with the PhD in math. The other's a fucking computer mastermind scientist who made like $120K a year, like back when he was like fresh out of college and shit. He had wrestled, was at Virginia Tech, got a scholarship, feel me, went from the East Coast back to the Seattle area, man, and to the east side, man, over in Bellevue. Well, I became a government, he worked in Redmond, but, you know, Bellevue, Washington is near Redmond. It's on the east side of King County. So I became a government contractor when I was in Bellevue, because I had other friends of mine that were also IT nerds, geeks like myself. And, you know, we call them the Goonie Squad, the Goonie crew, and from like the movie The Goonies. So my squad, my team, we started out west in the Puget Sound. We had started some different small business enterprises out there because we grew up in the aerospace sector. And I know guys that can take fucking computers apart, put them back together, man, like just boom, zip, like that. And they have like storage spaces and like warehouse spaces. Like I know this dude, he used to go to stores that were fledgling, that were going out of business, and he would buy like a good portion of what they had for sale. He just buy this shit. Like he just cash them out. Be like, oh, you got 50 computers here. You got a bunch of SIM cards and fucking these chips, and those are jazz drives. I'm talking old school shit. And I said jazz drive. And he would buy like thousands of dollars worth of shit on the spot, just like, boom, I'm going to buy all this. And then he would warehouse it. I know another dude who he introduced me to that owned a computer repair shop. So I'm talking every phase of computation, man, like software, hardware, internal components, repair, support, IT help desk shit, like any military grade, up to military grade level shit. So what happened was at some point, another friend of mine, college roommate, buddy of mine, I had been living in the dorms on campus. Well, it was actually across the street from campus, but it was the college dorms. I was living in the college dormitory, and we had a DJ from Japan, and he was a Japanese international student, and he would spin records in the commons area, like literally in the commons area, like sometimes a daily basis and shit. Like I'd go to school for a few hours, learn some shit about business management, IT. I had been in an electronics engineering program for 2 years, and I was in like 5 different college programs. I bounced around to different degree programs. So I was in electronics engineering for close to 2 years. The reason I got out of electronics engineering, man, was because when I was in electronics engineering, I was coming up close to having the degree in electronics engineering, and they were like, "Yo, by the way, we maybe you don't like the rest of this program. Like, if you want to get the bachelor's in EE in electronics engineering, you're gonna have to do the remainder of your college education at the Boeing at the Boeing plant, like Boeing headquarters, like at an electronics workbench." And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, this program, like, I mean, maybe you didn't know, but like, it's not on a college campus. At some point, you'll be at Boeing. And I was like, yo, fuck that noise. Like, man, I'm not going to work. Because I had been at the electronics engineering workbench at some point at an underground location in this program that I was in. And I was one of the instructors was former military, and it was a subterranean underground building that was below ground. And they taught us in Tacoma, Washington, electronics engineering. And I learned some shit about electronics engineering that most people in like public society, mainstream domain don't know about. And it's some kind of weird shit, man. And so at any rate, I'd been in EE, and then I'd been in business management. I was like, yo, at some point I'm going to get an MBA. So I started off in that. And then it was like, I was thinking about management information systems. So I was like, well, let me go back into computer information systems with a focus on management information systems. So basically IT. So I went back into a computer, information systems, IT programming, information technology, program. Got a bunch of certificates in Microsoft to certify myself with the whole suite of Microsoft products. And then I was like, yo, I got to step this game up, man. Like this, like I can see where this is going in the world of security. I need to get into computer information warfare. I need to get it based on electronics engineering. I need to get into EW, electronic warfare. I need to get involved in all these different programs that have an emphasis on security and countermeasures. And so this is pre 9/11. 9/11 hadn't happened yet. So there really wasn't anything cyber security per se. Cyber warfare was like looming on the horizon. It wasn't even like there yet, right? It was just becoming like cyber intelligence. Like it wasn't, man, I'm talking like 56K dial-up days. Okay. So I'd been in a plethora of programs, in other words, in excess, because it was just like so fucking much, dude. And I was spending all this money on school. I had been in a fucking gang. I was still going to the streets every once in a while, man, to hustle and shit on the sides with the homies back in the other part of town. Cause I was living in a high-end community, dude. I was living in a rich neighborhood and shit, man. I was living in a fucking wealthy, affluent, upscale neighborhood and shit. And that's where Brock Landers and I had gone to school, because we weren't going to go in the northern part of town, man. Too many distractions, fucking gangs and shit. But gangs started to show up, man, at the college and shit, man. I was in the dorms and they started to have fights, and niggas was just doing foul shit, man, on fucking campus, and cops were always there. And I'm like, wow. And plus the president of the school was involved with the Russian mafia. So I was like, fuck, man, this place has gone corrupt as all fuck, right? Is all get out. And corrupt as fuck. And that was in the newspaper too. So in that, man, that's when I was like, okay, it's time to become a government contractor officially. So in this really strange kind of a roundabout way, because I was working with these IT dudes, and we happened to be doing these projects where we were getting paid to go out to these different places and fix systems, whether they were commercial spaces, some of them were residential. And my buddies had these different companies that they own. We would go and we'd travel as a crew. And my buddy who I had moved into with his fiance, the three of us lived together. He was engaged to this international. She was from Japan, and they were going to get married. I had lived down the street on campus. He invited me to, because he knew that I was making moves, and he knew some of the people I knew mutually, and he saw that I was legit and I had dough and I was paying my rent on campus. He's like, "Yo, man, why are you staying on campus?" Like, and I was helping my grandmother and stuff, my elderly grandmother at the time, in the streets and shit up north. And so, you know, and I'd help her out on her property because I grew up on the property and shit, like, you know, doing everything that one does to maintain an estate, like working outside on the property, raking leaves and shit, mowing the lawn, edging, trimming, you know, raising flower beds and stuff like this, man. You know, all the horticultural kind of things that go on, right? And so pruning and you name it, man, and just maintaining the property, man. It was my grandmother, man, and I loved her dearly, man. And she's a U.S. veteran soldier, patriot, man. And she had been at the National Security Agency Fort Meade before it was NSA. So in other words, she was at Fort Meade. There's a lot of stuff at Fort Meade, not just NSA. But what I was saying was she wasn't at NSA. She was at Fort Meade before the National Security Agency NSA existed. Okay, so she put in work for America, and there's a picture of her with the governor of the state and some other women that were WACs in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, and they're receiving a plaque from the governor of the state at the time for their allegiance to America and for their for their role in having supported the military back then for the first time ever in history. So at some point, he's my homeboy who's a computer hacker. Another dude that I know from the aerospace corridor. He's like, yo, man, I know you've been staying at Grandma G's and shit. And, man, you know, you were on campus and still kind of sort of are at the dorms. Why don't you just fucking move in with my fiance and I, man? Cause like you'll be paying less, dude. And it's like, you won't have all the, you know, commotion and shit going on from this increasingly corrupt ass fucking community. Man, when we were first there, that place was ultra dope, dude. It was fucking, I mean, you know, the president of the school was involved with the Russian mafia, unbeknownst to us at the time. But later when shit hit the fan, man, and it was all public information, we figured it out because the campus was going to shit, man. But nonetheless, we were very close to the east side. So we were doing these jobs, we were doing this work, and he's the one that, you know, reintroduced me to war dialing and, you know, all the secret, you know, DOS functions and other things. And, you know, true computer hacker. We helped America. We actually did a selfless act. We found a company that was, they were dumping, information that would be considered a treasure trove of information and a gold mine, of data, social security numbers, all the logistical information, relating to families in the military that were moving from place to place, like overseas OCONUS, like outside of the United States, outside of continental United States, that were moving abroad periodically. Every furnishing, every item, every personal belonging, every iota of what they have that needs to be picked up and like wrapped and like boxed and shipped to foreign nations and then to other nations and then to other nations. There was a company that had a contract with the government to manage all of that data, right? And these fucking scandalous, downright dirty ass motherfuckers were getting paid to do this, and they weren't shredding the documents. Now, we're old school computer hackers, man, so we would do dumpster dives, man. We would just open dumpsters, see if we could find some data, some disks, some fucking CD-ROMs, some intel, right? Piece it together, some machines and shit. Man, we happened to open this dumpster one day and we're like, man, what the fuck is this? We start going through the papers. Hey, man, straight up, bro, you can say whatever you want, man. We knew that was wrong. We knew that put America's military service members in danger. So we had to turn that information into the U.S. federal government, bro. Like we had to present that to the feds, bro. Okay, because that you know, I mean, that company was doing American service members wrong. If anyone came across that information like we did, it had all of their information. It had their bank account numbers, and I'm not even talking about X'd out. Like it had their data. It had their social security numbers, their names, their places of like it had everything. The fucking spouses, man, the children, and it had everything that they owned and they possessed. I mean, man, for identity theft, man, that's the key to the city, bro. Now, a lot of motherfuckers would use that shit for evil. We used our skills for good. Okay. And we made a call. We made a few calls, man. And we turned the intel over to the U.S. federal government. We did so appropriately and properly, man. So niggas that think that we're fucked up, man, come on, bro. So look, so that was the beginning phases when we were becoming contractors. At some point when we were in Bellevue, we were introduced. Well, I can't even really go into details because it wouldn't make any sense. And you'd be like, that's unbelievable. And that's insane. And that's crazy as fuck. Well, so we're in this building well, maybe not. I mean, maybe you wouldn't think that, but it's going to sound strange. And again, I won't go into particulars or details, but someone introduced, herself to us, and she seemed to somehow know that we were in the process of becoming government contractors. And I know that sounds crazy, dude. And I know that sounds weird and it sounds delusional, but it's absolutely a fucking matter of record and fact. And so she provided us the necessary documents and books that we needed to go through the process of getting certification to become government contractors in order to provide services to the United States government. And I took the classes, I got the certs, and then after that, I happened to be in an area that's desert. And this is all true. And I used to really be like athletic and like, you know, college, going on university. And I told y'all that I had taken the Foreign Service Officer exam, and that I was at Gonzaga for the 6-hour written test. And back then it was all paper. Now I hear it's computer based, but when I did it, it was all written. So I took the Foreign Service Officer exam just to prep, just to prime, just to get into the mode of gov, right? I did that, had to travel far to do that. That's Gonzaga University. I was at Central Washington University to challenge myself and to take the fucking in Ellensburg to take the graduate record exam, GRE. So I did that, and that was at the behest of my my friend, who was another former roommate before he was married with his wife and kids. He's a professor of mathematics out here now. He's the one who suggested and recommended that I take the graduate record exam because he knew that I could do it. And I did, and I believe that based on my scores, they were higher than average. So apparently I had retained some information from high school and college. So I did that. And then when I knew that I was coming to the East Coast here, I had gone on kind of a sabbatical, traveled to like 25 different states, did some reporting in terms of I was working with some intelligence community people who had approached our group of IT guys, if you will, and cyber dudes, I guess is probably better. And they were like, hey, I used to be at this agency for 20 something years, and now I'm with this federal entity, and I'd like to be part of this group. And we're like, all right, so we get it. So any intel that we have, we just provide you and your oversight, essentially. So we had to have that information submitted and get it approved and everything. And then, without going into details or particulars, there were some times when we had intel, man, on foreign intel, with calls from people that had some seriously fucking important information, man, of a serious magnitude and gravity. And I'm talking about, I mean, I can't even go into particulars or details, but I'm talking about data, man, hard drives in storage in storage lockers and shit containing highly sensitive information, man, pertaining to some fucking terrorist events, man, and shit. And so we tracked all that data, and appropriate agencies got it. Okay. So I won't go into particulars or details, but I'll just say Oceania. So we were later involved in that level of intel. And then at some point after I had worked my way up the food chain of command and had enough successful operations under my belt, working with different agencies, they would later refer me and they would say to other agencies. And I just walked through the door, man. I mean, because I already had my certs, I already had my experience, I already had referrals and vouchers, and I was already, man, at that level. So I mean, and I had spent fucking way too much money, man, on fucking school, man. Like shit, like $100,000+ on fucking school, and so at some point there was a gig, and they were like, we need someone that has like 10 or more years or 20 more years or whatever experience in IT, computer science, information computing, and information technology rather. And so I, knowing of that opportunity, extended myself, reached out, and they first did a telephone interview, and they were like, all right, we're going to give you these scenarios. Like, what would you do? Now, this is the United States. This is the federal government. This is military. And I was like, well, I would do this. I do this. I do this. I do this. They're like, dude, that is fucking excellent. Like, you just answered everything perfectly. And so that was based on 35 years of tinkering with computers. Without going into details or particulars, what I would do was I was tasked with legacy systems, going around finding devices and different computer systems that were antiquated and collecting dust. And then I would have to inspect them and try to determine what they were, if they had been malfunctioning, how they could be powered up, if any kind of repair needed to take place, who would be tasked with repairing said system, and then also login credentials using Linux, Unix to establish credentials for military clinicians, in other words, medical practitioners who had either never been to the base prior or had been returning the base from leave or assignment rather elsewhere, or both. And so that, we would authenticate and provide by providing login credentials to said individuals. And so there was that. And then communicating with military military officials regarding the status of the networks. So yeah, so that was that. But then beyond that, because in that particular project that I was paid for, those motherfuckers were fucking assholes, dude. And I realized that at that point, those motherfuckers, dude, were some of the most condescending, pretentious motherfucking pieces of shit I've ever fucking met in my entire life, dude. And they thought that they were so fucking hard. And and I can't go into details because my contract states that I'm not able to do so. I can't go into any kind of particulars or details. But the one thing, man, the one thing that I can say is I work with this dude that was using the wrong terminology, man, and I knew that he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. And I was like, man, this motherfucker, man, has a security clearance, and he's using the wrong lingo, dude, the wrong jargon, the wrong phraseology, the wrong terminology. This motherfucker doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, he had skills, dude, and he could do shit, but looking back at what he was able to do and what he knew, I'm like, yeah, whatever, dude. I mean, that ain't shit, man. I knew how to do that fucking shit when I was a kid, man. And plus, he used the wrong fucking terminology, man. This motherfucker's just getting a paycheck, dude, just to be here. And his boss, dude, she was fucking always like just kind of looking like at me, like, she would say little things like, oh, hey, like, you look very professionally dressed. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm a fucking professional. But I was like, okay, yeah, I get it. Oh, okay, yeah, hey, yeah, nice to talk to you today. But then she would like glare at other times too. And I'm like, man, what's her trip? So what I found out, man, that all these motherfuckers, they never knew if they were going to be able to keep their jobs or not. And so it was always this like jockeying shit. And they were always like talking shit to contractors that would come through the door. In fact, the motherfucker was talking shit to me on day one, talking about like, what agency did you come from? Oh yeah, well, they keep sending them here. And I'm like, fuck off, dude. Like, hey man, like, you don't know me from Adam, dude. And I don't really, fuck you, dude. Like, really? This is how you treat people that walk through the door? Like, I'm a new guy, dude. And so what, what are you saying, bitch? Right? So those dudes, man, fuck those guys. So that's when I figured out, dude, that's when I knew that I had to eliminate the middleman, dude, and do the shit by myself, dude. So I became a contractor without having to go through those different agencies, dude. And I was tired of those motherfuckers trying to tell me how to run the op, man. So, I went back to work with another agency, man. That I had worked with someone from another agency who got, essentially promoted, man. And I can't go into any type of details or particulars about that. But, it was better being at that agency by like by fucking 1,000+%. And, I had better, I had more latitude and better tools, and it was faster moving, and it was in the field, man, and it was dynamic, and it was fucking US Intel, not fucking with some dickheads, man, at some military base where there's some old fucking dinosaur outmoded using fucking Stone Age shit, man, and then trying to act like they're hard. No, man, I'm talking about motherfuckers that use cutting edge tools, dude, in the 21st century, and move quickly type shit on some Intel International type shit. So that's how I became a government contractor. And yeah, man, because just rapping and shit and making money in the rap game, like here and there, like being a professional fucking rap artist of 25 years, that's all fun and stuff like that, man. But I like to do things, man, for humanity if I can at this point, man. With 495, like I was saying, back on the West Coast, man, I was a mentor at some point, and I would bring Bloods and Crips together, man, for football games. And I was doing gang intervention shit where I'm like, yo, man, I mean, is the gang still, good for you, man? Kind of thing, man, like counseling, like young adults and the youth. And then I was a school teacher, man, in a Korean private school for 10 years. And I taught K through 12. I taught some college and some undergraduate and graduate students. And I did that for 10 years, man, while simultaneously working in government. So that's how the fuck I became a U.S. defense contractor in science and technical. By the way, my designation is technical specialist, and that's real shit. So, a lot of motherfuckers, man, they think this, they think that. They don't know the whole story. They're pompous and lofty. And I tell you all these things humbly, man. Like, I haven't boasted about any of this stuff, man. This is just a matter of record. Like, I haven't been like, yeah, man, they paid me this. This is how much money they paid me. And, man, I was fucking awesome for doing this at this one particular agency. Nah, I told you, man, I'm a down to earth, grounded dude, man. I'm a grounded, down to earth dude, man. When I rap, it's all for entertainment shit, man. Because my homeboys and I, we grew up in the streets, man, of the West Coast. And we were around shady motherfuckers, man, that were off on some fucking foul shit, doing faulty shit, man. And they were always trying to talk shit to us and like put us down. And like, I mean, at some point, man, they knew not to fucking say anything stupid to us, man, as we got older and shit and we gained more like power on the streets and shit like that. But I'm saying there's motherfuckers that were like, oh, you guys are never going to do anything. You guys will never ever put out an album. Man, this woman, man, she must have said we would never make $1 in the rap game. The next day, like, this might not seem like anything to you. We used to sell tapes, man, fucking cassette tapes in the streets. She said, you guys think you're doing something. You just need to get regular jobs. You'll never make any fucking money in this hip hop rap thing. $200 we raised within 24 hours selling tapes back in the 90s. Okay. The fucking 90s, early 90s. $200 back then, it was like fucking $2,000 now. And, anyway, check this out. It happened to be that her husband at the time was a rap artist in our organization. We just so happened to fucking put the money in the safe at his house, right? Because we'd have meetings at his house. She fucking got pregnant and used the money to feed herself like Wendy's and McDonald's and shit, man. Now, come on. This is someone who just used the money that we made hustling in the street, selling tapes. She used that money to feed herself, okay? After she told us we would never make any money in the rap game, and we did within 24 hours, and we were making money anyway, man. She was just talking shit. But the point is that there were people that would say condescending shit to us like that, man. Just fucking asshole mentality, just saying rude shit to us, man. And, so there's a lot of highly misinformed motherfuckers, man. And, these guys, they say this and, this shit ain't real. And yeah, really? Yeah, that's what you thought, boy.